Hello, this is Darren Pulsifer, Chief Solution Architect of Public Sector at Intel, and welcome to Embracing Digital Transformation, where we investigate effective change leveraging people, process, and technology. On today's episode, we're going to talk about managing risk in the face of ransomware with special guest Steve Orrin, CTO of Intel Federal.
Hello, Darren. Good to be here today.
Oh, you are on my show more than any other person I've had on my show. Why is that?
Well, I think because security is just a fun topic.
I think you're just a glutton for punishment. It's
you
security guys, right? Right? You're always dishing out fear, uncertainty, and doubt, but you're not doing that today. You actually have some really interesting things we're going to talk about security and what's coming up. And how that is going to affect everyone.
So yeah, I mean, we're seeing some really interesting trends. If you look over the last year of what's happened in the marketplace, what's happened in the industry, we've seen a rise in the number of attacks, the sophistication of the attacks, and it's really come down into sort of three key areas of attack. I mean, again, cybersecurity is this huge domain. We see attacks across every possible avenue or area, but three vectors really seem to be a recurring theme. And I don't think anyone would be surprised that ransomware is probably at the top of that list, with just the sheer number of organizations and companies being hit by ransomware, and the fact that it's just always in the news. The more recent supply chain attacks, you can think of SolarWinds, but there have been some other very interesting supply chain attacks that are of note. And then just the continuum of data breaches. Most recently, McDonald's had a global data breach and others. And so I think if you look at the key trend, it's those three vectors are really the ones that keep happening over and over again, or that really are stressing the systems.
So stop right there for a second. Why do you think, because you kind of started, the attacks are becoming more sophisticated. So why is that? Why are they becoming, because those three vectors require sophistication, right? So why are we seeing more sophistication now? What's leading to that?
Well, I think you go after the money. And so organized crime, nation state actors, and other threat agents recognize that it takes sophistication to compromise and thwart the current security controls that are out there. To be able to stay stealthy longer so that you can do more damage or gain more data. And so in order to be able to be stealthy longer, to be persistent in the organization, or to be able to enable the scope and scale that they're looking for, it requires, it's a constant cat and mouse. So as our security controls in the security industry get better and get better deployed, and our turnaround time on vulnerability patch management gets better, and our detection rates get better, the adversary continues to get better. But I think one of the trends we've seen for a number of years is just the level of maturity that we're seeing in the threat agent and in the adversary. They, just like our own organizations have software development lifecycle processes, have sort of tools that they build off of and frameworks they work with, so does the malware community. They've got good process for building quality into their systems. There's purchasing and selling and borrowing of code amongst different organizations. They learn from each other. They share information. There's dark web information sharing, where various different threat actors work together to build better threats, better malware.
All right, so what you're telling me is they're becoming better organized. They're hiring DevOps engineers, right, to run pipelines. So they're actually running these like companies now.
Absolutely. I mean, it's
instead of just a ragtag team of hackers, right?
The threat agents are in the billions of dollars of outcome. And so in a $1 billion+ industry, and depending on which analyst firm you look at, it's either a $9 billion industry, could be a $10 billion, $30 billion. The threat agents are making lots of money, whether it be through ransomware, through data breaches, through credit card breaches, and a variety of other mechanisms. There is big money on the adversary side. And that big money drives the need for maturity, just like you have in the positive side. If it were a $100,000 market, you wouldn't have any maturity. But the fact that it's a billions of dollars, you're seeing people look at this as a business. And when you look at some business, you want maturity, you want integrity, you want quality code that actually works in the field because you're relying on it to generate the income.
So that with them taking a different approach, we can't just tag security on as a bolt on the side anymore, is what you're saying.
That has been true for a very long time. Security can no longer be and can't be bolted on. It's got to be built in, and it's got to be built in everywhere. And I think if you think about that, the gospel that the cybersecurity people have been preaching for a long time is security isn't bolt on, it's got to be built in. So when you build your product, you have to build security features in. I think some of the learnings of last year is it goes further than that. It's not just the products you build, but the infrastructure and processes you use to build those products have to be secure. And that was one of the lessons of SolarWinds and some of the other supply chain attacks, that even if you built a good product, the infrastructure that supports it was vulnerable. And so they were able to get in and modify your code, no matter how good your code was to begin with.
So that hardening of your DevOps pipeline, the hardening of your delivery mechanisms, that has to happen not only where it lands, but through the whole factory, the software factory process.
Oh, absolutely, and beyond, absolutely. I think one of the interesting things we've learned, just going to that sophistication, but there was a really interesting learning, and I don't think it's been said enough. Oftentimes, organizations think, well, of course, financial services and government and other regulated or high-value industries are going to be targets. And so, of course, they have to do better on security, but me and whatever vertical I'm in, I don't have to worry about it. The recent attacks, whether it be the JBS attack, which was the meatpacking industry, McDonald's, Audi, and others, has shown that no one is immune, and that we have all become super reliant on the digital infrastructure that we've deployed. A ransomware attack took down the world's largest meatpacking industry. That says volumes. That means A, that any industry, any vertical is susceptible, and B, that every vertical is truly reliant on their information technology and their OT systems to be functional in order to be able to operate their business.
Okay, now you scared me. I want to disconnect from, maybe I went into the wrong industry. I mean, I'm all about technology, but everyone's vulnerable now. So Steve, you got to give me some hope. Is there hope out there? I mean, what do I do? I mean, you're right. Meat, they attack the meat industry. I mean, come on.
Yeah.
Or McDonald's. Why would you attack McDonald's?
Because McDonald's has assets, has value. There's customer information that was gleaned. The meatpack industry, you're looking at a ransomware, because every day you're not producing meat and the meat is getting stale on the shelves is a problem. And so that's why they think about it.
Right? Yeah.
Exactly. So there is hope at the end of this tunnel. There's light, but it requires work. And so whether it be doing defensive depth or it's taking a look at some of the novel architecture around zero trust, better hygiene on our internal processes, sec DevOps, as you were talking about, these are all important things to do, but it's not a silver bullet. None of them by themselves will solve the problem. It's about having the diligence to apply the right risk metrics to your organization to implement security correctly. And I think that's the thing that's often missed. There's lots of security technologies. I mean, it's a $40+ billion industry to do in the cybersecurity space. The trick is understanding for your organization what is the right level of security that you want to deploy for all of your different applications, your data, and your infrastructure. That takes being able to properly measure the risk of your assets and of your business. That takes work, and that's where we're seeing a lot of the stress. And we look at what the cybersecurity framework from NIST really was about. It was about a framework for helping organizations properly perform risk management and risk determination. From that then goes, okay, what controls do I need to mitigate those risks that we had? So the learning was that everyone is at risk, and like I said, like you aptly described, everyone is vulnerable. The solution is to understand what is my risk so that I can secure it. If you don't understand your risk, no amount of security controls will actually do the job because you don't know you're applying it to the right place.
Yeah, because you can't apply it everywhere is what you're saying, because there's too many. I think that's interesting too. There's too many tools there, right? I mean, what tool do I apply where? It's like going into the hardware store nowadays, right? I can't just buy a hammer. Right? There's how many different types of hammers? I just want a hammer and nail. I just want to do something, but you can't do it because there's so many options. And now there's training involved and doing it right. I still just get the biggest hammer I can find and use it.
But here's the thing, if you knew what you were building a shed and using wood and you had wood nails, you know exactly the right hammer for the job. And that's what risk is about.
Only because I went to YouTube and looked it up. and you know, and that's harder to do with security tools, right? A lot of these tools, because I played around with them, they require a lot of knowledge up front to understand those things. So where do I go? If you know, I'm a mid-sized company, or maybe I'm in a company that's not high tech, I don't have, you know, I don't have a bench full of expensive CISO or, you know, security experts. Where do I go? Is there a place that I can go to find out, is NIST the right place? Where do I go to find out how to go forward?
So there's some really good questions there. There are great resources out there, whether it be SANS, as far as training. There's groups like ISACA for being able to get access to information on how to do security risk assessment, how to do audit properly. So there are great organizations out there that you can get that information. There are companies that their business is to help you understand your risk or help you understand how to deploy technologies to vet those things. So there's obviously lots of tools out there for you. The key is starting with what is the right set of policies and risk for your organization. One thing that I think that Zero Trust, as much as it's been a marketecture for a long time, one of the tenets of it is this notion of what's called default deny. And so, but even if you haven't fully figured out how to deploy a Zero Trust architecture yet, the premise of not allowing everything to have total access, of just denying outright all access requests until proven that they deserve it, is a step in the right direction. Because what that means is that you're putting up a gate before you ever get into the door. And then once you get in the door, there's another gate. And every door you go through has got a lock, as opposed to one master drawbridge, and then everything is soft on the inside. That defense in depth approach of the default deny is one of the tenets of Zero Trust. There's a lot more that goes into it, and we're not there yet as an industry. But I think that alone is a key thing. But if you are a CISO or a CEO of a small business, and you're worried about how do I properly do this, there are some great resources out there, whether it be things like, you know, if you're a big enough organization to have the resources to do a cybersecurity framework, great. If you're not, there are good trainings you can get from SANS and ISACA. There's things like the security scorecard. There's open source tools that are available. How do you rate your implementation across what they call the different vectors of security? You know, detect, identify, authenticate, recover. There's tools out there called the security scorecard that will help you assess a particular application or a particular business process. But it takes work. And then again, what we find is that small businesses often playing catch up. Yeah. Because they just don't have the resources. And that's where companies like MSPs come into play, managed security providers, where they do this on your behalf. It's important to note that you need to vet those companies well, because they themselves have become targets of the ransomware and the supply chain attacks, because they know it's a scaling function. If I hit one MSP, I get 1,500 customers in one fell swoop, which is what we saw with the Kiasa attack. So again, there are things you can do, but again, there's always, you know, a risk involved. So you have to properly evaluate that risk.
So I love how you said, let's use some managed security providers, because if you're a mid-sized company, your strength is not necessarily cybersecurity. And just like you might have a security agency that secures your physical plant, you want to do the same thing for your infrastructure. Hire someone that understands how to do it. That can always be. I love that approach. I think that's a good approach.
Yeah. But one thing I would say, though, is that even though you're not going to have the team, you're not going to have the money to afford a large team, you should still always have at least somebody on the inside who is trained, who is an expert, because you want to be able to have them have that local context and domain experience inside your organization to work with that MSP. Because if you punt everything outsourced and have no training or people inside that can take that and build that in, it's always going to be outside. You're not going to be bringing that knowledge in and proliferating it through your organization. Because it's, again, even with the MSP model, all they're doing is managing your security tools and configurations for you. They're not imparting a lot of security wisdom to your business units, to your IT folks, and so forth.
So you still need a CISO that establishes your security policies, your posture, your risk assessment, You still need someone to do that work.
Absolutely, and you need that person to have several security architects or implementers so that they can go forth and actually help the organization better prepare and be able to deal with events. And so you still need, even if it's not a big team, every company should have a team. It has to, and in the light of the recent attacks and threats that we're seeing out there, there's no excuse anymore to say, oh no, I just didn't have enough money to fund a small security team.
So let's talk about money, because ransomware seems to be the biggest moneymaker in this industry right now. Well, it's the most visible.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So what do you do to help counteract ransomware? Just some simple tips.
It's a good question. When we look at malware, so a lot of the good tips are sort of before you get hit. Probably, after you get hit, you're really in a bind. So we'll talk about that in a second.
Okay.
Beforehand, there are some things you. Number one, backup regularly, and keep backups offline. Have pristine copies of your data and of your systems and of your applications and of your configurations in an offline, out-of-band storage environments, whether it be taped backup if you're, God forbid, you're still using that, an offshore, a cloud-based service provider, a USB stick that you keep in a vault. Have pristine copies of your data and of your most critical infrastructure and data sets and architectures, so that if you get hit, you have the ability to recover, even if it's going to take you time to buy the systems and deploy them, your data, at least some form of it, still exists. That's
now,
one of the things that...
How long do you need to keep those back? Because sometimes you may have the ransomware sitting in your backups, won't you? I mean...
Well, that's the key is that the ransomware is, once it starts doing its damage and starts encrypting files, it's fairly quick that you find out it's done. It typically waits, and then it starts encrypting things, and then by the time you figured it out, it's done the encryption. If you're doing regular backups of the data itself in clear form or encrypted by your applications, and you're verifying those, because again, it can't be just, well, just back up whatever that directory is. I don't need to look at it, because you'll be backing up the encrypted data sets. But if you're monitoring the data and making sure that you've performed appropriate encryption and controls on that, and you've got security controls on what can access those databases, that will give you some pristine version. And you want to have a good 6 months of clean backup data so that you can recover back to a known good state once you figure out what happened. Another key thing that I found, again, this is cost money, but it is, in light of the threat, is have available systems. So for instance, if you're running a certain database product and it needs to run on a particular rack or type of server or type of platform, having the ability to have those systems available offline so that you can spin them up in a failover or a redundancy model. So business continuity planning. A lot of people do business continuity planning from a physical disaster, flood, power outage, what have you. Having some systems available where you could quickly deploy those VMs and those containers with your database, with your HR systems, with your custom relationship management, whatever those mission critical enterprise applications are, to get you back up and running while you both figure out what went wrong, but also while you wait for your OEM or your supplier to ship you new systems. If you can't recover, having the ability to get back at least partially up and running is going to be absolutely important. And so having redundant systems available that you can then bring online, having the ability to go to the cloud when needed, to burst to the cloud so that you can recover even if in a cloud basis until you get your local systems back up and running. Those are kind of the techniques that you could use.
I was going to say cloud would probably be the easiest, right? Maybe.
Well, in theory, the problem with cloud, of course, is that it can be ransomware like the rest of your data. So it's about keeping cloud resources in a pristine state.
In a pristine state. So maybe even saying, hey, I've got my business continuity cloud is actually a different cloud service provider.
Potentially, yes. That's one step. The other that we've seen organizations start to do is what we call the canary in the coal mine. Is having systems deployed across your enterprise that have the sensors turned to 11. Now, those systems are not going to be performing great because they're going to have 20 different security tools on them and they're going to be doing every kind of check. But you want to have a couple of those out there. They're going to be the early warning system that something's gone wrong. And so what often the problem you find with a lot of security products is, oh, it's too costly from a performance perspective, or it takes too much storage, or it's too slow on my UI, so you don't deploy it across the organization. Whereas what you can be doing is deploying them in just some places and putting out those those canaries to be early warning systems and get them out there. That's another technique so this way you can be quicker on the cusp of detecting something is going wrong or seeing that, is having those sensors out there in your enterprise live so that you can detect when suddenly you're seeing a lot of encrypted traffic that you didn't see before. It's encrypted traffic going to certain domains, those kind of things. So definitely have the canaries into your enterprise. And then the challenge, and this is something that a lot of people are struggling with right now, do we pay the ransomware? Do we talk to the FBI? Regardless of what your plan is, have a plan. That is the key. You may not, you're still going to get screwed. It's still going to happen. Something's going to happen. You're going to get the ransomware. But if then suddenly you have to figure out, okay, what do we do? You're going to be behind the 8 ball the whole time. So start with having a plan. What is it and the plan should be implemented not just with technical people, with your lawyers, your compliance officers, your CEO, your CFO, counsel. Everyone should be together and say, here is the plan for when we get hit by a ransomware or a data breach. Who do we call? What numbers do having the FBI's phone number and having that plan on a piece of paper so you can access it is important.
I can't access my plan. It's been
encrypted with everything. Yeah, but so definitely have a plan that everyone's bought into so that when it happens, you kick that plan into motion and people know what to do. So you're not scrambling. And that will buy you time because then if you look at some of the attacks that have happened, you look at the investigations, there was lots of time, weeks that went by as people try to figure out what to do or who do I call before anyone started doing anything. And then whatever the plan is, and again, I'm not advocating for one thing or another, but make sure you have that plan and everyone bought into it. So you're ready to go. And if your plan is that you're going to pay the ransomware, you should know how to buy Bitcoin. If your plan is to call the FBI, you should have the local FBI office and the digital office's numbers and contact information. The other piece is war game that plan. So not only have a plan, but run the exercise. See if it works. See if your teams are trained in what to do. So and then tweak it based on the outcome. So you not just have a plan, but you run it just like you would a disaster recovery or a business continuity plan. Ransomware is one of those kind of effects now that we should be having well-documented and well-practiced plans.
So it should fit in your business continuity strategy now, right?
Absolutely.
Cyber attack, ransomware, data breach are probably the two big ones in your cyber attack plan.
Absolutely.
I actually really like that idea. I think that's something that a lot of mid-size and even big companies don't have yet, and they absolutely need. So great idea. Now, I have another question on ransomware, and this probably goes to the meatpacking industry. It's another friend of mine that I have that does envelope mailings, right? And he said his number one concern is ransomware in shutting everything down. So he has segmented off his OT from his IT completely. His OT, the things that run his technology in his factory, are not on the internet, period.
So he says. So here's the thing about IT/OT barriers. And again,
so I want to know,
in theory, that's great. Yeah, I could separate but the reality is that our IT/OT barriers are fused. Because how do you manage the OT systems? Well, there's things that tap in there. So they may not be directly on the internet, and most OT is not directly on the internet, but the OT is managed by, interfaced to, and supported by IT systems. They're co-resident, they talk to each other. And so the ransomware didn't come in and attack JBS over the internet directly to their OT systems. That's not how that happened. That's not how most of the pipeline or any of these other systems. It started on the IT side and then propagated over. And so anyone who thinks that they can totally separate their OT systems from their IT systems may need to look at what that is, because the reality is that you think about it, a trouble ticketing system. So some machine goes down, has to issue a ticket so that a maintenance person can be scheduled to go out there. That's an IT system. Someone's getting an email message. That's an IT system. These systems are connected more than anyone thinks about. And so, yes, you don't put your manufacturing line directly on the internet, but you connect it to your corporate network. And if you don't have good security on that IT/OT barrier and are protecting the transfer and the communications, and implementing so that some of those security authentication, two-factor and so forth on that barrier, you're going to have the crossover. And that's what happened. Many of those organizations had good OT security, at least in theory, but they weren't protected from the IT side of the camp.
Yeah,
or
because
from
someone said, hey, I need to be able to see the status of that machine when I was on vacation or during COVID.
Well, I mean, it's not even that extreme. Yeah. Just imagine you're on your corporate network managing that OT system. You're not outside. You're not in the internet. But your corporate internet has access to it, and you can access that system internally, same laptop.
Gotcha. So understanding those barriers, putting the proper guards there, right? Gateways and guards is essential. It's not, you just have to understand. You have to monitor those gateways.
Absolutely. And I think one of the things that people also think about, is they think that OT and IT are truly separated. Your manufacturing line itself may be running on computing machines that are running those manufacturing, but much of what drives your supply chain, your logistics, and the overall organization that makes your business run is IT systems. You may be producing meat or producing a widget, but how you sell that widget, how you get the raw materials into the warehouse to get that widget is all IT systems. So if they go down, your machines may be able to run, but nothing's going to leave and nothing's going to come. Exactly. And so I think that the idea that we can just wall off the OT from the IT and then we're good, it's important because those OT systems are harder to secure. But it's more than just saying, well, I did that and I'm good. Your IT systems are mission critical. And I think that's the learning, is that we are reliant on digital technology for all of our businesses.
Thanks for listening to Embracing Digital Transformation today. If you liked our episode, go ahead and give us 5 stars on your favorite podcast or video streaming site. You can also find out more on embracingdigital.com. Until next time, keep moving forward and do something wonderful.